Welcome to the place where we gain knowledge through the lens of creativity. I am Aaron Dworkin, and this is Artful Science. Thanks again for joining me here on Artful Science. Today's show is Gaming and Social Media, the Science of Screen Time. And my guest is Sakshi Ghai. Welcome to the show, Sakshi.
Thank you so much, Aaron. What a pleasure to be here.
Oh, well, it's so great to have you here. You serve as researcher at the University of Cambridge, PhD student in psychology with a focus on empowerment, technology, digital inclusion, and behavior change in the context of the global South. And I think also the North as well. So you come with a lot of knowledge, wisdom, and experience to this issue. So we really appreciate it. So I figured I would just kind of start out with this question, right? So this issue to me is actually very personal. I have two sons. One's just graduating from college. The other's just entering into high school. They both love gaming, have loved it for a while, still love it. They've had iPhones since they were young. I let them game. Am I a bad parent?
Not at all. Not at all. In fact, it's really interesting because since the advent of technologies, we seem to have developed a very binary view. Either you are a technology optimist or techno optimist, or you're sort of in the camp of a technology pessimist. So you view technology as a curse, as a very harmful platform. And of course, the scientific literature as well as the public discourse have deeply reflected on the harms of technology, including gaming, and rightfully so. But much of the literature that sort of focuses on how, and in fact, we are still discovering and uncovering some of these negative consequences of technology. So it's been really interesting to see how the conversation on negative aspects of technology, risks of technology, have been sort of dominant in the narrative for all of us. So whether you're a parent or a teenager themselves, as well as just in school and colleges, and just in the general rhetoric of how we all view technology. Now, of course, it's a bit too simplistic to sort of blame technology for a lot that happens. For example, in the context of teenagers, we often hear the strong link between mental well-being and adolescent mental well-being and the use of technology. So the more time that adolescents spend online actually reduces their well-being and increases their anxiety, depression. Makes them more susceptible to some of the harms of it.
And is that something that there's really good data, like kind of, right? A lot of this, it sounds like you're saying we don't fully know yet. We need more time and more data, but it sounds like there are some things we do absolutely kind of know unequivocally, or the data is pretty clear. So on that, is the data clear? Is there a clear correlation between time online and mental health in adolescence?
So it's really interesting because the evidence on screen time and social media use has been, and adolescent development has been actually very mixed. So one of my advisors, Dr. Amy Aubin, who's a researcher at the University of Cambridge, has used large-scale data to actually examine how digital technologies affect adolescent and psychological well-being. And it's interesting because we have a lot of studies that show some small positive correlation between mental health and social media. Then we have a lot of studies that actually show negative, and then somehow we have some studies that actually show null associations. So the evidence is really mixed. While the narrative is that, this relationship is strongly negative, there's little empirical support for it. Anecdotally, of course, you hear things like social media is as bad as giving cocaine to your child, and you sort of hear about these negative implications that seem very pronounced and very alarming.
Gotcha. So in some ways, it really sounds like the jury is still out. There is some data on both sides of this equation. So one thing I was wondering, when television first came out, it seemed like what we hear from history is that people said television's bad and it's rotting your brains and all of that. But clearly there is good television and bad television that can actually really advance your knowledge and experiences or connection with others, and some television that clearly is probably not helping in that way. So is there any data, or what would be your sense of whether there's good screen time and bad screen time? Is there any data that we know that a difference of if you're playing some mindless or war or violent game versus something that actually is very directed, educational benefit? Do we know if it's not the screen, but what they are doing with the screen?
No, that's a super interesting question. Actually, before I dive into that, I just wanted to quickly clarify that, while the jury is still out, at least in the psychological literature, it seems like there is a very small association, even if there is, and most often it's negative, especially when you apply large-scale data to really examine this relationship. It doesn't seem very pronounced. So while most of the discourse has been focused on the negatives, I think the relationship does not bear out as much as there is literature around it. But the reason I also wanted to sort of take the conversation slightly digress before we get into the kind of screen time is that it's a really interesting paradox, and this is really where I'm very excited to get into this field and really think about this research. That on one hand, of course, in the global north, when we think about technology, it has or it carries this negative association, especially when we think about our children's well-being. But equally, I grew up in India, and I have now seen technology in the hands of just about everyone, from farmers to fishermen to children, school children, to people from elite households. It's even penetrated to rural villages in many of the regions in the global south. And of course, these devices are used for effective communication, connectivity, but they also provide vital access to services like health, education. So it's really interesting because on one hand, there are some contexts where digital technology, screen time can promote positive change, while in other contexts almost exacerbate disparities. So it's a really interesting paradox. So considering the context and sort of considering the population is sort of also an important ingredient as we think about how the relationship plays out.
Wow. So sounds really critical that not only is it potentially what's being seen on the screen, but that the context, the environmental context, the social context, it could literally sometimes even be a lifeline versus others where it's just purely a recreational potential negative impact. So really fascinating. And so unfortunately, we're already even running a little bit short on time, but a couple additional questions. So one, any data about violence, that the violence in video games, all of those, as a parent, should I be like, okay, if there's going to be some gaming, but I should either put a cap or block any things that relate to violence? Anything we know about that?
So actually, before I dive into that study, there's been recently a groundbreaking study coming out of Oxford that has evaluated time spent online playing video games and really the relationship to well-being. And actually, researchers found a positive association with well-being, and that's been sort of very fascinating, just to see that there actually could be potential benefits to playing video games. And speaking from my personal experience, I recently I recently played a video game, and I was pretty impressed by how these games can sometimes give you the platform to actually build a lot of cognitive skills or even computational skills. um, but from that research specifically, they looked at the relationship between objective game time and well-being, and really examined the link between that and their subjective well-being. And I think the focus, if I'm remembering it correctly, the focus was on how they would feel, or specifically how feelings of autonomy, competence, enjoyment, pleasure was related to well-being. And one of the key findings was that actual amount of time spent playing was very small, but had a significant positive factor on people's well-being.
Wow.
So while I know that there has been a lot of discourse on how violence can be perpetuated, and especially fictional violence and how harmful that can be for kids. There's also some research coming out very recently that shows that the relationship can be positive. And again, just thinking about how you can possibly game yourself to be dysfunctional, but at the same time it can carry some benefits. And often the trick with technology and screen time is really that balance, and really striking that balance with the objective amount of time spent as well as the subjective benefits.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I'm coming away not feeling so bad, and that definitely I see that balance as a key. But it's also so interesting, the complexity, just like so many things in life. It's just not a simple gaming's bad or good, or screen time's good or bad, but there really are all of these influences that are really fascinating. So unfortunately, we are just about out of time, but I always need to ask my guests, since we're here at this intersection of the arts and sciences, do you have any kind of arts practice that you do yourself, or that you really appreciate?
Well, before I get into arts practice, actually, I'm a humanities student who actually pivoted to the sciences. So, actually, my undergraduate was in philosophy, and then I sort of made my way into behavior economics and psychology. So, in college, I was sort of fascinated by humanities and the arts. Bit of a dancer growing up, like traditional classical Indian dancing, but then sort of lost touch over the last couple of years. But yeah, I really think the idea of applying humanities and arts and combining that with the sciences is really powerful, and the cross pollination of ideas is, I'm sure, going to be very interesting.
Oh, well, Sakshi Ghai, thank you for helping us gain knowledge through the lens of creativity here on Artful Science.
Thank you so much.